Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Good day. How are you?
I am good. Thank you. It's so nice to have you here. And congrats on this beautiful book, How to Calm Your Mind, Finding Presence and Productivity in Anxious Times.
Ah, I love how that turned out. With the waves, I
Yes.
guess most people are listening on audio, but if you go to the YouTube channel, you can see it.
Absolutely. And listeners, I'll have a link to all of this in the show notes. And yeah, it is. It's a beautiful book. But you know what I love is at the start, you're like, I didn't intend to write this book. So tell us, like, what led you to actually write this book?
Yeah, so I usually write about personal productivity, which is quite different from calm, from tranquility as well. But I was on stage doing a talk in front of about 100 people when I noticed that beads of sweat were starting to form on the back of my neck. I noticed my voice got trembly, my heart rate spiked, and I've realized maybe a quarter of the way into this talk that I was having an anxiety attack on stage in front of this particular audience. And the weird thing at the time, deconstructing this, luckily, long story short, I made it through the rest of the talk on autopilot mode. I'd rehearsed quite a bit, which is good, but I remember deconstructing this situation afterwards and being surprised more than anything else that this anxiety that I had inside of me had the space to metastasize into this full blown anxiety attack on stage. I was going to the spa with my wife at the time. I was, meditating quite a bit at the time. I was doing all these things and investing in what I saw as self care, but still it wasn't really working. And so, noticing all of that, it led me to chat with the experts out there on self care and conduct experiments on myself and look at the academic literature as I usually do with productivity, but this time with the subject of calm. And I found quite surprising things. And I thought, okay, all right, there's no way I can't write a book about what I've learned because it's helped me so much with the hopes that it'll help other people go who are going through anxiety, going through burnout, going through a stressful time, how we can absorb all that and come out even better on the other side.
You know what I love about this is the name of the podcast, Tranquility du Jour, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I've heard from people, it's like, okay, well, what's this tranquility thing? Like, if you do all these different things and you're kind of like, I wouldn't say busy. I hate using that word, but
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
you're kind of always on the go. It's like, what's the tranquility thing? And I remember being like, oh, I guess I need to define like how I view this, right? So,
Yeah.
of course, I looked up tranquility and it's the quality of calm, right? So I love this, how to
Mm.
calm your mind. And but then I have kind of like shifted it a little bit, which I love that you have too, with this idea of calm and productivity. But for me, it's like the quality of calm within a full and meaningful life. So full, right? It's
Yeah.
like we have lots on our plates, but things that we've chosen and things that are really important to us, and meaningful, like we're making some
Yeah.
sort of contribution, whatever it might be, planting a garden, raising a family, adopting
Yeah.
pets, whatever, right? So that's why I really, really like this. And as we were talking before we began recording, okay, who is not experiencing anxiety right now, right? It's like
Yeah.
off the charts, and
Mhm.
existential, really, I think is the big piece. So
Yeah.
describe to us the opposite of calm, which you
Mm.
talk about in the book.
Well, that's the fascinating thing is, we hear the word calm mentioned quite a bit, and when you look at the academic literature, there isn't a lot. I was surprised to see just how few research papers there are on the subject of calm. But those that do exist, they suggest that calm and anxiety are on the same spectrum with one another. And so on one side, we have anxiety, high anxiety, panic attack on stage, our anxiety boiling over, where our mind is super agitated. We're relating to our thoughts in a negative way. That's one side of the spectrum, maybe the far right, let's say. And then we go down the spectrum. And the thing about anxiety is so often we think the opposite of anxiety is just the absence of anxiety. It's having no anxiety whatsoever. But the research shows that this point of no anxiety actually lives in the middle of this calm spectrum. So it goes from highly anxious down past this midpoint of no anxiety, all the way down where our mind continues, our thoughts continue to settle. We relate to them in a continually more positive way until we reach that state of high calmness on the other side of the spectrum. And so it's characterized as a calm is characterized as a state of low mental arousal where we relate to our thoughts in a positive way. So we don't have this self talk that's constantly coming with us for every experience we have. We don't always look for the negative in situations, right? That one negative email, that one negative, stupid thing we said 10 years ago at some party that for some reason our mind loves to pull up as a cringeworthy memory sometimes when we're in the middle of a conversation. We don't have as much emotional reactivity. So we react proportionally to situations as they unfold around us at work, at home, the things that we're trying to enjoy. And when you look at the tangible things that this high state of calmness leads us to, it's exactly what you mentioned. It's being able to fully immerse ourselves in experiences, right? We don't rush past the most beautiful experiences of our life, the conversations, the I'm sipping a delicious cup of jasmine tea here as we record. And let's say this is the most delicious cup of jasmine tea in the world. We can relate to this experience differently depending on whether our mind is calm or anxious. If we're anxious, we're probably going to be reacting to different situations, to different emails. Our mind will be frazzled and we won't really pay attention to this delicious cup of tea. But if our mind is calm, we'll have the capacity for enjoyment. We'll have the capacity to savor our lives, which there's also a lot of science behind, and we'll actually be able to settle in and let our shoulders down and enjoy. And there's productivity benefits here as well. We'll make this time back so there isn't such a need to feel so guilty about investing in calm at the same time. So it's quite fascinating to me how I thought of no anxiety is the opposite of anxiety, but turns out we can keep going past that point of no anxiety, where we become even less reactive, more settled, just happier, more immersed in the moment. And that's a state of calm.
A beautiful place to be, and who does not
Yeah.
love some jasmine tea? So I
Oh, are you a
like
fan? Are you a fan?
huge,
Oh,
huge.
this is my go to
Wh
jasmine.
What's the brand? Like, do you have a favorite?
Oh, we get it from so there's a in Ottawa, there's a shop called the Tea Store. I don't know where they import it
Mm,
from, but it's a
yeah.
loose leaf
Oh,
thing that
nice.
it seems to be that the places around here have the same supplier, but I'm not sure what it is. Do you have a
And
go-to?
I was just thinking I've never met a jasmine tea I didn't love. They're
Yeah,
just
same.
so yeah, they're so
Wow.
good.
Yeah, love it.
It's like drinking flowers.
It is.
Um,
Yeah, very
so,
calming.
the piece too that I really appreciate that you talk about, because I think so many people struggle with this of how do I find calm and still stay productive? And so
Mhm.
my question for you, and you write about this, how does striving for accomplishment, actually make us less productive?
Yeah, and it's the most ironic thing, but it's fascinating, when you look at the research. So there's kind of two modes that our mind can kind of be in at a given time, and we oscillate between them. And the first network, the first mode is the here and now, where we're appreciating the present, we're immersed in the present. And then there's these modes that pull us out of the here and now. And the most common one that you see come up in research is this craving of more, is this striving for more. And it's this acquisition mentality that's referred to in the research. And so we have brain networks, not to nerd out too much, but I'm interested in this stuff. Hopefully, other people are too. So there's brain networks associated with the here and now, and there's brain networks associated with acquiring more. And the interesting thing is these networks are reverse correlated with one another. And so when we're present in the moment, our here and now network is activated, and that acquisition mentality is not fired up. So we're able to immerse ourselves. But interestingly, the more we strive for more of something, whatever currency in life we're trying to optimize for, whether it's success, whether it's money, whether it's followers, whether it's social recognition, when we're trying to acquire more, the here and now network gets suppressed. And so we have less focus and less presence of mind to bring to whatever it is that we wish to be doing in the moment. And so I find this to be absolutely fascinating because it's the very striving for more of something makes us less likely to achieve that thing because that striving pulls us out of the moment and what we're trying to accomplish in that moment. And this kind of noticing this led me to all this research on the productivity benefits of calm, which is something that I don't think we think too much about or internalize that much. But here's, after studying productivity for about a decade now, the golden rule with productivity advice is for every minute we spend reading about productivity or listening to some person like me talk about productivity, we have to make that time back and then some, right? Or else, what are we doing? How are we becoming more productive? And I really do think calm fits squarely into that category, especially when you look at the relationship of calm's opposite, anxiety, on our cognitive performance, on our productivity. One example of this, if you had to give a presentation in front of 500 people in 5 minutes, and in those 5 minutes, I asked you to multiply 84 by 67 in your head, it would probably take you 2 to 3 times as long to multiply those numbers in that stressful, anxiety inducing event as it would just on a random Friday, on a random Tuesday. Similarly, if you were reading a book or watching a movie or writing an email and you're in an airplane and you're going through airplane turbulence, you're going to struggle to get that task accomplished because the alarm bells are going off in your mind. You're in this anxiety mode, this threat mode, and you're on that anxious end of the calm spectrum. And it's going to take you significantly longer to get things done with that state of mind. And so we're kind of like it's that old quote where I'm gonna butcher it here, but essentially the gist is the gist of it is the fish doesn't know that they're in water. We often don't realize the anxious or calm state of our mind because it's the air that we breathe, it's the environment that we're living inside of, but it really does influence our productivity. It's so much so that a standard 8-hour day, and I break this down in the book, can take as much as 10 hours to get through. And so, if we have that 8-hour time window that we try to get work done inside of, we end up having to work evenings and weekends and take fewer vacations, all because of an anxious mind.
An anxious and distracted mind, right? Which I
Yes.
know we're gonna get to because I definitely wanna talk about analog versus digital, right?
Oh,
So you talk about lowering, and I love that's a stimulation height.
yeah.
So can you explain to our listeners the stimulation height and how do we lower it?
Yeah. So let's break this idea down. Let's deconstruct this idea. So the, there are different things that we tend to throughout the day that live at a different altitude of stimulation, depending on how novel they are, usually. And novelty is the key factor because anything that's new and novel releases more dopamine inside of our mind. And so, something that is incredibly novel, one example of this would be takeout food, social media, online news, these really hyper novel things that we tend to throughout the day release an incredible amount of dopamine simply because they're so novel. In fact, so dopamine, I should break this down a little bit, is a neurochemical in our mind that our mind releases when it feels as though pleasure is right around the corner. And so we check Instagram and we get a hit of dopamine. We feel as though pleasure is on the way. We never quite feel pleasure itself because we're not in that here and now mentality where we're able to calm ourselves for the present moment. But we do get that, pardon me, that hit of stimulation that propels us forward to the next source of distraction. So maybe after this, we check email, we get another hit of dopamine because that's novel. And then after that, never feeling satisfied, we bounce over to check Instagram again. Maybe somebody liked our stuff, maybe our explore tabs there. And so we bounce around in this kind of dopamine fueled feedback loop sometimes, constantly seeking satisfaction, but only finding mental stimulation. And the thing is, depending on how novel the things are, they live at a different altitude of stimulation. And our stimulation height throughout the course of the day, in other words, overall, how stimulated is our mind, is determined by how much dopamine we choose to tend to on a daily basis. And so, if we wake up in the morning and bounce around on our phone, we go to work, we're still on our phone, we're going between apps all day long, we come home, we drink a bunch of glasses of wine and binge watch TV while on our phone, we're going to live at a really high altitude of stimulation, of course. But the kind of converse is true if we construct our days around this calm tranquility. And maybe we wake up and instead of our phone by our side, we have a book, and so we journal about what we slept. We journal about what we dreamed about. Then maybe we get up, we prepare a cup. Well, of course, a cup of jasmine tea instead of coffee, which actually it's interesting. I write in the book about how green tea has L-theanine in it, which actually dampens the adrenaline rush we experience from caffeine. And so we have less of a stress response to caffeine when we replace our coffee with green tea. So, very, very good trade for calm, for tranquility there too. Maybe instead of being connected all the time, we put our phone in another room as we wake up. We wake up in the analog world instead of the digital, and we go on our day like this. We have a nighttime wind down routine, and we essentially construct our days around calm, around presence, around actually enjoying ourselves. Imagine that. And so we live at a lower altitude of stimulation, and our mind is calmer at these lower altitudes because we're not constantly seeking the next hit of dopamine. We're finding presence, we're finding enjoyment. And if you look at the tasks in our work, in our life that we actually want to be spending time on, they're usually the ones that live at a low level of stimulation, right? Spending time with people doesn't release a ton of dopamine, right? Because it's not super stimulating in the way that social media is, but hardly anything will make us feel more meaning than time with other people. The most productive things that we do over the course of the day, the things we create, the things that we do, the differences that we make, the things that we actually want to be doing at work, the important things that we've been putting off, usually live at a lower altitude of stimulation as well. The analog world lives at this low level. The campfires, the card games, the board games are at this lower level as well. And so the places we actually wish to be spending time on, that we have the fewest number of regrets about where we spend our time, live at a lower altitude. And so it's by eliminating, at least temporarily, the items at a higher altitude that we can get back on track and focus and reclaim this presence with what we want to be doing. One of my favorite ways of doing this is a stimulation fast. And so, what you do is you eliminate and you shrink, if you can't eliminate something, all of the distracting things that you tend to, uh, maybe largely because they're the most novel. And so for a period of a month, I still remember my first dopamine fast. So I eliminated all the social media apps from my phone. I logged out of those apps on my computer and I changed my password to something impossibly long. So I'd have to reset my password in order to get back in if I was tempted during the experiment. I stopped consuming online news. I subscribed to a physical newspaper. I felt like I was going back in time. My hands were covered in ink after I read them, which I didn't realize was a thing. Turns out, newspaper is a wonderful substitute for digital news. It refreshes once a day instead of every 3 to 5 minutes, which is a lovely thing in and of itself. But essentially, swapping out all of these dopaminergic things, these things that I tended to for the dopamine release, for things in the analog world, for instruments I haven't played in a while. I actually hired a piano teacher to learn the piano again. I read physical books and I slowed down. And I still remember just the profound effect that this experiment had on my mind. Because when we eliminate all of the upper band of activities on this stimulation heights chart, the things that we tend to for the stimulation alone, we find more presence. We invest more in the here and now. We actually notice and savor and enjoy our lives as well. So we become more productive, we become happier, we become more present, all when we mine these altitudes of stimulation. Sorry, long answer, I know, but hopefully that's helpful.
Super helpful. And that was actually my next question. What is a stimulation
Oh,
detox? So no, perfect.
hey. Oh, so
Got it.
okay. So it
Done.
wasn't, it was as long as it needed. We covered two questions.
Perfect. It was perfect. Well, and I'm wondering, okay, so after you did this fast of sorts, how have you maintained, because I assume you're back
Mhm.
on all of this stuff to a degree, right? So how have you shifted it, right? So you've got a little detox still in
Yeah.
your life, right? But you also are maybe still engaged, especially, with your book. I'm sure that
Yeah.
you've been doing a lot of promotion and whatnot around it. So
Yeah.
how did you find that happy medium after the initial detox?
Yeah, that's been a really annoying part of the publicity process, actually, is having to go back on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And it's the most ironic thing because in the book I break down about how all these services can cause us anxiety when we're not careful. So it's really, a process of practicing your own advice, which, in the most challenging of circumstances. And I find that I still when I still need to do fasts. I find that every few months or so, I need to do another fast for about a month, because we do have all this chemistry inside of our mind that we have to actively work against, and go to battle against when we're trying to focus in such a distracted time. And so, I remember after the first fast, it was actually around the start of the pandemic that I conducted it. And I came back into the world as COVID cases were spiking in Canada, and all these situations, and so it was much easier to go back to being disconnected back then. It felt kind of natural, but these days you're exactly right. Social media, this constant connectivity is so intertwined with our lives. And the challenging part is we all have this same neurochemistry where we crave these things by default. There's this mechanism in our mind called the novelty bias, by which for every new and novel thing we direct our attention at, we do get that hit of dopamine. And so we get this chemical reward, this reward on this chemical level for distracting ourselves, for overstimulating our mind, which makes us feel stimulated in the moment at the expense of our calm satisfaction over the longer arc of time, which is not really a trade-off that I'm willing to accept. And so I do find that every few months I need to do another stimulation fast, and I'm always happy that I do. As these, it's kind of a game of whack-a-mole, right? Where these moles will pop back up, and you need to constantly play this game of doing this stimulation fast in order to keep your mind at this calm level.
Yeah, I love the vision of whack-a-mole. It is. And I've always heard, of course, negativity bias, and I have
Yeah.
not heard of novelty bias. So
Oh,
I
there you
like
go.
that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
totally makes sense though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you talk about one other thing that I wanted to touch on is the invisible sources of stress buried in our days, right?
Yeah.
And as you and I were talking before we began recording of just the level of anxiety and that we're surrounded by right now. the pandemic, kind of getting
Yeah.
through that, even though I know things are still happening with that, but war, like
Yeah.
so much, and so, and then of course you have it on the micro level, right? In your everyday life. And so
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, what, whenever you talk about invisible sources, what do you identify and what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, yeah, such a good question because we all can spot a lot of stress in our life. It's not hard, and we usually don't have to look very far. Whether that's family, health, finances, the economy, inflation, we don't have to look far. I'll just say that. Um, but the interesting thing, really dissecting this topic of the stress that we face, is we also have a lot of hidden stress in the depths of our life that we don't really label as stress, but yet our mind perceives as stress. So, social media is a really good example of this. We have this kind of low undercurrent of stress when we're on social media that propels us forward that we can't quite put our finger on the pulse of because it's the stimulation that wins out. It's the dopamine that propels us forward. But I remember when Frances Hogan, the Facebook whistleblower, was testifying in front of Congress, and she essentially boiled the Instagram algorithm down to two things: bodies and comparing lifestyles. And I still remember this, and I remember going back to Instagram, and it wasn't like terribly bad, but it was all lifestyles for me. It was people traveling, it was people on vacation, it was people fitter than I am, just living their lives. And I still remember, really looking at that and thinking about how I naturally compared myself to the people that I saw on social media. And on some level, you talk about the threat bias, saw it as a threat, because of course these people are doing better than I am, and so why wouldn't I be stressed by that? But it extends to the news as well. The news is, the most under talked about source of stress in our modern lives. By a wide, wide, wide margin. There's still one study I think back to when I was, poring over all these journal articles, in this office here, and I remember pardon me. Sorry, editor, for the throat clear. I still remember encountering one study that was conducted around the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings that looked at two groups of people. The first group of people were those who watched 6 or more hours about the Boston Marathon bombings, so news coverage about it. And the second group of people were runners in the actual marathon itself. And what the team of researchers found was that those who watched those 6 hours of news coverage were more likely to develop post traumatic stress disorder and reported a higher level of stress than somebody who was in the marathon and personally and directly affected by it. And if this doesn't make you never want to read the news online again, I don't know what will. It definitely had that effect for me. It's always, a delicate balance I find with the news, right? Because I want to stay informed. I want to know about the issues that are affecting the people that I love and the communities that I love and that I'm involved with. But at the same time, if consuming this negative news robs me of the mental resources that I need to serve these people in this community in the first place, then it's having a negative detrimental effect. And so it is really all about that balance. I find a newspaper works really well. Even though I think I'm the only one in my age demographic in the city of Ottawa that gets a physical newspaper still, I find it's a wonderful balance of, this daily briefing that somebody prepares on your behalf, where it has everything you need to know about your city, about your province or your state, about your country, about the world. And so the news is, I think, a deeply hidden source of chronic stress, and that there is a point at which stress becomes comfortable. Right, because it's so familiar, it becomes ingrained in our routines. And when we have that comfort of stress combined with the fact that we naturally crave novelty, the novelty bias, those two things together make us feel as though we need chronic stress in our life that is negatively affecting our lives, robbing us of mental resources, making us far more likely to reach a state of burnout, making us exhausted, cynical, unproductive, which are the three core attributes of burnout. And burnout is ultimately the ultimate manifestation of chronic stress in our life. And so anything we can do to tame this stress, especially with the low hanging fruit, the news, social media, it's time well spent.
It's so funny that you mentioned too the Boston bombing because I remember, so 2013, and I was leading a retreat. And of course, we
Mm.
had the news on as we were waiting for
Yeah.
retreaters to arrive and just watching it unfold, right? They're looking for that second brother and he's found in the boat. And anyway,
Oh,
and I remember as
yeah.
like somebody arrived like really early, right? And so and then so she sits down and she's watching it with us. And it was one of these things I was like, this is not the way to start a yoga retreat weekend, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but
It's the opposite of a yoga retreat.
it is
Yeah.
the opposite of the yoga retreat, but we were glued, right? But you're right,
Yeah.
like, the piece about watching, I mean, how fascinating that watching that coverage, that it was more upsetting, than some of the people, right, who had run. And,
Yeah.
I've read this and, I'm sure you talk about this, but how what we consume actually affects us on such a deep
Yeah.
level that, as you say, it's like, we have this baseline of like high stress. And it's almost if we don't have it, we're like, something's wrong, and we're craving it and we're seeking it. So it's just interesting. I don't know if you want to speak to a moment or if you could on like
Yeah.
really being conscious about what you consume. And you definitely have, right, with like news and social
Yeah.
media. But I'm wondering if there's anything else that you've noticed, like from a consumption level,
Mm.
really intensifies our stress.
Yeah. Well, we perceive the world around us through the lens of all of the information we've consumed in the past. And so, in this way, the things that we choose to focus on are the result of all of the information we've collected and connected inside of our mind. And so I think there's just an incredibly strong case to be made for being kind of a bouncer. You know how there's a bouncer outside of a bar? Be a bouncer for your own mind and really determine what information is worth consuming. And so, something that I love doing is I'll look at descriptions for TV shows, for movies, for podcasts, and think, okay, this will be their pitch for my attention and my time. Whether this will be worth it, and a lot of the times it isn't, because we so often, as you're kind of alluding to, we fall into these patterns of consuming information, either on autopilot mode, so not really considering it much, but also because we've just consumed things in the past, so we might as well consume things in the future. But that decision to be the bouncer for your own mind is it's kind of a moment of empowerment. As maybe, I don't know if that sounds corny, but that's what I think of it as. It's this moment of empowerment where you decide, okay, my mind is worth defending, and my mental health is worth defending, and I'm going to take charge and ownership over my own mind. And wait a second, I don't want to put everything that I've consumed throughout my life into this thing, because I know the effect that this has on my stress levels. I know the effect that the news has on my stress, that social media has on my stress and my anxiety, and my ultimately my productivity, how much of a contribution I'm able to make to the world around me, whether at work, whether at home, regardless of the context. And so I think, that decision, seeing every kind of description of something as a pitch for your time, for your attention, for your energy, is critical. And also minding that when stress becomes comfortable and familiar, and especially when it's highly novel, that you'll pay attention to it naturally, even though on a deeper level, you might not want to. And I think that is the key here, is so much of the stress that we have in our life, because it's hidden, not all of it, but much of it, we choose to pay attention to, right? And so I love the question. I love the frame of that question, because we do have a choice a lot of the time. We don't have control over a lot of the stress in our life, but when it comes to the hidden stuff, we usually do.
Yeah, thank you. It's so helpful. It's such a good reminder. And before I ask you my last question, is there anything we haven't touched on? And because I feel like even my additional sort of questions, I was like, I think we've covered, but because there's just so much juiciness here. But this idea of investing in our calm and productivity at the same time.
Yeah.
But is there anything else like that we haven't touched on with regard to this beautiful book that you want to share?
Oh, oh, there's that.
No
That's a
pressure.
blank check.
I
Yeah.
know it is, right?
Thank you for the one thing, and it's mostly because there's jasmine teas in front of me right now, is the subject of savoring, and that's something I think is worth highlighting really quickly. Is there okay, I encountered a lot of different research, fields over the course of writing this book, and it was fun to nerd out over all of these, but one that stopped me in my tracks was the science of savoring. So, savoring, we all know the word. It's basically enjoying something fully. And savoring, there's actually a science to it and steps we can take to more fully enjoy everyday experiences. And so, savoring is the process of converting a positive experience into a set of positive emotions. And so, what this means is just because we experience something incredible doesn't mean we'll derive any satisfaction from it whatsoever, right? Again, going back to the tea, somebody who has an anxious state of mind, who is in a meeting, or whatever the external or internal circumstances provide for savoring, they might rush past this nice moment of the day, whereas somebody else who's able to fully appreciate what they're doing in the moment might enjoy every sip. If this is the world's most delicious cup of jasmine tea, let's say, theoretically feels like it today, maybe because it's Friday. But it's fascinating that there are concrete ways where we can convert positive experiences into positive emotions. We can do so by luxuriating in an experience, where think of a cat basking in the sun. Right, we can luxuriate in something. We can practice gratitude for experiences, which makes us, reflect on how great they are in our life. We can marvel at experiences, right? When we look out, I'm looking out my window here. It's a lovely snowy day in Ottawa today. It's cozy. Um, Life is good. We can marvel at something like that. We can even savor the past and the future. And so and this counts as savoring because we do so in the present moment. So when we savor the past, it's called reminiscing. When we savor the future, it's called anticipation. And it's fascinating where the sum of the enjoyment that we get from an experience is not just in the moment where we're actually enjoying the experience. We tack on the anticipation and we tack on the reminiscence at the end. And so for a vacation, if you get excited for it and you count down the days, that counts as enjoying your vacation. If you then look back on pictures afterwards, that counts as enjoying your vacation. You get more enjoyment out of your experiences. And the fascinating thing is, this practice of savoring actually allows us to sharpen our focus over time. It allows us to become more immersed in the moment. We practice, it's almost a cousin of mindfulness. It's different because it's a positive rumination on what's in the moment, but we're still in the moment. It becomes easier to focus. We see more opportunities afterwards too, because we're not in that threat bias. We're not looking for threats in our environment. We have learned to appreciate and reminisce and anticipate and enjoy the good that's in the moment. So, I think that is a fascinating finding where, whether by marveling, anticipating, reminiscing, we can derive more satisfaction from individual experiences, which when they add up, we derive more satisfaction out of our life, while becoming more productive. So, uh, what's better than that, right? So that's something I want to share.
I never thought about it as a threefold thing, right?
Yeah,
Anticipation, yeah,
yeah,
enjoying, and then in the moment, and reminiscing. Beautiful. So my last question for you is the name of the
yeah,
podcast, right? Is Tranquility du Jour. And I think you've shared a lot of really wonderful ways that you find tranquility in the everyday as you sip your jasmine tea.
yeah.
But I'm curious, is there anything we haven't touched on that you really make sure is part of your day to
Mhm.
experience this calm that you talk
Yeah.
about in your book?
Yeah, one final thing that I'll leave folks on is the analog world. Now, we spend so much time tending to the digital. And in fact, over the last few years, our digital time has gone up to about 13 hours a day. And we're awake for 16 or 17 hours a day. So that's a high percentage of our day. But if you look back at your life, you know, and look at the most meaningful moments of your life, they probably didn't happen in front of a screen. And this is not to put down the utility of the digital world, because I truly think that the digital world is awesome in the purest sense of the word. We wouldn't be talking today if it weren't for the digital world. We wouldn't be recording a podcast today. I wouldn't have written a few books if it weren't for the digital world. There's one time Taylor Swift liked one of my tweets. That never would have happened if it weren't for the digital world. Thank you, Taylor. Um, but at the same time, if we look back at our past experiences to what are the most meaningful, usually, almost always, in fact, they're analog, right? They're the family board game nights. They're the nights where we're kind of huddled around a campfire with friends. They're these deep conversations that we have. They're, the first date with somebody who ends up becoming our spouse for life, and we still remember. It's the best moments of life are analog. And one general guiding principle that I like to share with analog versus digital is when we want to do something efficiently, we should do it the digital way. And if we want an experience to have meaning, we should do it the analog way. And it's a simple guiding principle, but if you look at where efficiency and meaning come from, there usually is this dichotomy of usefulness between the two worlds, where we can get all the parts that we need from the digital and get the efficiency, get the productivity, make our life run smoothly. But we can also savor things deeply and enjoy the good things that comprise what life is all about when we spend time in the analog. So it's all about that balance. That's something that, out of any of the ideas, full disclosure, this is the thing that I'm still working on the most from the book, because no matter how far I get with it, there's still a bit of a ways that I want to go even deeper into the analog, especially in a world that pulls us into the digital. But I think that pull is something we should actively be working against.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. And wonderful, again, this beautiful book, How to Calm Your Mind, Finding Presence and Productivity, which I know my
Oh,
listeners will love in anxious times. So, again, so beautiful. And thank you for all the wonderful, really like tangible takeaway tips. It was
oh,
great to have you on the show.
so good to be here. Thank you for having me.